Hey everybody, how's it going? Hey, look, I wanted to do a follow-up to the masterclass that we just had with Patrick, talking about how to create irresistible games. And for that follow-up, I just want to do two things. A small one, which is what were your thoughts? What were your thoughts of the masterclass? I mean, this is the first time doing it. We really focused on, several topics that we explored in depth with the central theme. Would love to get your thoughts on that. And the other part is I figured, considering that, this masterclass was a sponsored thing, in particular, what we were doing was, diving into these topics that, related to a course that Patrick just launched and cover those topics in this format, in the masterclass format. And, in light of all that, I thought it would just be helpful to provide, an unbiased and honest review of the course too. Because look, I mean, one of the main reasons we did the masterclass and with this collaboration with Patrick was, hey, look, we're discussing topics that are important, that dive deep onto these things. And then in addition to that, if you want to go further and have a lot more structure and processes to go through learning those things that we discussed, hey, look, at least now you have an opportunity to sign up for a course, to pay for a course if you're interested. So that is a real driver and reason behind this, but I thought it would also be helpful if we just gave a review of this. And honestly, too, there's a couple reasons for this. One, again, just to provide you guys with additional value, especially for anyone who's either considering purchasing the course, on the fence. But the other one, too, is just simply I couldn't recommend a course or even partner with someone if I myself didn't put myself through it. I think there's, a lot that's needed for that. And it's a kind of a big ask, I think. And if I can't just simply come out and, stamp my approval on it if I didn't go through it myself. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right. And again, I want to take this approach as unbiased and honest as possible. And I think the only way I could possibly do that is if I went through the course myself, and I did. And now, as again, like I said, as a follow-up to the course and everything, to the masterclass rather, I'm going to give this review just so you guys can have a little bit further insight. So I'm going to take some time to do that. My goal is that this is only going to be about a 10 or 15 minute episode for those that are interested or haven't checked how much this is. Check the amount of time. But anyways, that's the plan for today. So that's my intro. And hey, just, full disclosure, disclaimer here, any purchases made through the podcast, Indie Game Movement, will receive a commission. And again, I'm calling that out too, just for transparency. But I also, I'm just saying that this isn't to influence my review. And really my goal and purpose of this is just to provide you an authentic and unbiased insight and also some other perspectives about the course, because I just want to be true and fair in everything else. And again, I can't support or collaborate with someone if I haven't put my stamp on approval, and that's why I'm going through this whole process. All right, so and let's get to the overview. Ultimately, what I'm going to be doing is doing that while also identifying what I thought worked well in the course, cover some areas that I thought, could use some improving, and also outline who this course is intended for. So in general, the course, the name, as you may know, but it's called The Art and Science of Creating Irresistible Games. And really the key focus with this is to look at player engagement from a psychological perspective, understanding the why and motivations of players, and then incorporating that understanding into your game through a series of course exercises and content that I'll get into more of that in a moment. So pretty straightforward. But again, the key thing I want to call out here is understanding the why. The why, what motivates players. And taking that, because if we don't have that understanding, it's hard to, attribute that or incorporate that into the games that we're making. And another thing that I'm calling out to is, essentially, Patrick here is making a claim for his course that it's, by understanding and mastering, in particular, 3 core pillars of success is what he calls them, can lead to sustainability. And I use the term sustainability here simply because if we describe it as lead to success, well, it's very subjective and stuff. Sustainability, I think, is a little bit more actionable and objective based. So that's why I'm calling out to that, sustainability. That's the focus of this course, the claim, because those three core pillars are going to help you do that. And another cool thing too about this course in general is just it's all backed by science and years of experience that, Patrick has had with working, with numerous titles from mobile indie to triple A. So this is all helpful, but I think that, yeah, people's experience is great. Patrick has a lot of it, but I think the part that I like the most is the incorporation of science. And I'll provide some other examples in a moment why I think this is so important. And, overall, one other thing that I like too is just the level of understanding in this course is honestly something I just don't believe many game creators really explore or look into. And in fact, the industry as a whole doesn't really do this either. And there's so many different examples and ways why the industry doesn't do this, or it's typically reserved for, let's say, higher, like triple level type stuff. And honestly, even sometimes at that level, they don't dive as deep as I think they could be. And here, I'm not necessarily saying, hey, we're lacking in this, we're not doing it, and we're completely lacking in this. But, I'm saying that just that we as game creators, we do this on some level. And we're definitely aware and can be relatively intuitive in terms of, player behaviors and what drives and what motivates them. Now, the key difference here, though, is even if we're aware of these things, even if we're intuitive and about this and everything else, we get that sense, we're not completely aware of the definitive reasons or the why specifically. We may get a sense of these things, but we don't completely know the true motivations or reasons behind these things. And if we don't properly understand those things that well, then it just makes it harder for us to, again, incorporate that. So that is really kind of the quick overview of the course, and what it's really designed to do is looking to do that thing, is understand those whys and using these principles and everything else and how to execute properly with our games. So let's get into the core review. Specifically, let's get into kind of the structure and content. So pretty straightforward here. You can get a lot of this if you just simply go to the landing page and whatnot. That should be in the show notes. But the main course information landing page will do this too, but real quick go through it. So there's 5 categories, but the 3 main ones are going to go into each of what Patrick calls the pillars of success. He, shared these in the masterclass. And of those 3, the first one has 11 modules, which is the engagement, 7 modules for accessibility, and then 9 for the monetization. And in total, there's about just under 10 hours of content. Plans to add more on that in the future. I'll get into that later. But so that's the key kind of structure, as you'd expect. But yeah, about 10 hours of content. But in addition to that, where I think there's a lot of value added here, these 2 ones stand out to me is, you also get a one-on-one hour consulting session with the course creator and bi-weekly Q&A sessions. I think those 2 are really helpful because, look, any course, any type of information, places where you're learning these things, in some cases, they can be anecdotal. In this case, I find that at least some of the examples here are really good ones, and they're aligning with the key principles, which I think are totally relatable to everybody, or people. It's not unique to any particular situation. The principles are the key things that are applicable to everyone, right? There might be other examples of monetization that might differ depending on where you are, what you're working on, and such. But the key thing here is, let's say in some instances, and again, this is with any course, where you're looking at something, you're seeing some examples or whatever, you're like, hey, I get it, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily relate to me. Well, that's why I love that there's those 2 other offerings, the one-on-one consulting session and the bi-weekly Q&A sessions, because then you have the opportunity to ask questions, to get further guidance in terms of what's really applicable to you. And I think that makes all the world of difference and really strengthens the course a little bit more. In addition to that, what you would probably expect is assignments, exercises, and again, plenty of examples. And there's other supporting materials and resources such as like templates, docs, guides, all that type of stuff too. And last but not least, there's the community for additional support. And it kind of relates to my comment I made before about, hey, having these other elements, having these things where you can talk to other people, especially other community members, can really help, I think, drive your own motivation and learning these things, understanding them, and then applying them to your game. So all great stuff there. in terms of the basic structure and content that this has. And in light of that too, I want to call out to some of the other things too that I think is really cool. One thing is like this whole course, this whole thing starts off fairly simple and basic, and then it really dives deep. So just to give a quick example of this, when discuss in the portion that discusses like why we play games and getting into the core motivations, of players and stuff. What I love about this is because all this consistently is relatively simple and easy to understand. Anybody coming into this from any experience level or whatnot, and then again, these concepts are going into areas that are so cool because they're talking about things that all players have, everyone. And it's why, because it's looking at the approach as them being humans. All humans have this and stuff. So it's understanding, and this is being used to help support the framework, and consistently, it's this framework that helps to further explore the rest of the curriculum. And again, throughout the course, it's been giving me a lot, and everybody else going through it a lot to consider. And it really pushes you to think more broadly and openly about any biases or preconceived notions we may already have about player motivations and how they relate to game design. So now I want to dive in a little bit to what works well. And I'm going to try to do that with like each section, each of those main sections. So in terms of player engagement, I really liked how this section gave me so much to consider and pushed me to think even more broadly and openly about, again, those biases, those preconceived notions, and to really think more about how do we interpret this information? How do we interpret what we already know that we've read from other things and stuff? And to even dive deeper on this and to better understand these concepts and how we think about players, how we assume a bit about them, there are certain areas that the course dives into deeper, into specifically the self-determination theory of intrinsic motivation. Yeah, big word there. But again, if you referencing back to the player engagement portion and such, Patrick mentions the importance of intrinsic motivation. But and going further, he dives in more, covers like the three main factors that contribute to this intrinsic motivation, their importance, and how they relate to your game and everything else, and how you can incorporate it. And great. And he even goes into the intrinsic motivations too, because these are the areas that we can get kind of caught. We think we're doing everything right, everything is hitting the right levers and stuff for us, and metrics, whatever, results. But then we realize, wait, it's not working. And understanding the difference and the proper balance and those things is really important. And again, this section really, what I liked a lot is it really challenges us in our views, again, how we categorize players and their behaviors. And one of the reasons that I picked up and noticed that why Patrick does this is because there's lots of cases, and he provides this, where information doesn't necessarily align with the core motivations that humans have. And there's a lot of things that are really interesting. He's using examples from everyday work life and stuff, everything that we can all understand and relate with, and then bring it back to and articulate it in a way how it is also applicable to games. Again, making us better understand these situations and having clarity and how we can then incorporate it into game design. And this is probably not the best example, but one very simple one I decided to come up with to help reiterate this point is just think of it as terms of, hey, if you believe people who play, let's go to the assumption that here, if you believe that people who play JRPGs only play JRPGs, right? Well, that thought, that belief is really just an assumption. And well, it's maybe oversimplified, but ultimately what this example and what I'm showing here with you is that, look, when we're looking at different player type models, we often find ourselves in those situations where we're rationalizing our thoughts based off of, let's say, topical and surface level information, such as, people who play JRPGs only play JRPGs. But we're doing so without the true understanding of those motivational aspects that all people have, right? And that means players. So that's one thing I love about that section, because it really dives deep into pushing us kind of to the limits in a way to better understand why we feel that way, how we feel that way, what is apparently the truth and really questioning and again, and this is going to now influence everything we do and how we incorporate it into our games. All right, moving on to another section, the accessibility component. This is great because it just simply redefines what we know and how we may interpret what accessibility is, but in a much more holistic way. So, at face value, when we talk about accessibility, yeah, we're probably talking about people with disabilities and things like that and making things more accessible. And that's just one tiny part. And the reason why I like this portion of it, and it might sound a little silly at first, like, oh, why do we redefine this or interpret it in a different way? And it's simply because when we look at things this way, again, we have these preconceived notions. We might not look into it deeper. Because accessibility really relates to just about every aspect of game development, from pricing all the way down to themes, and stretches across the tech and cultural elements. So by doing this, it allows us to kind of like open our minds up a little bit and think more about what does accessibility really mean, and why this is so important. One area that I think this does so well is, Patrick poses these things and expresses it in a way where next thing you know, he's laying out so many missed opportunities that, game developers, studios probably don't consider or take account for in so many ways, and probably quite regularly. And when we start looking at accessibility in terms of how it can apply to various and all aspects of our games, then we start to be like, whoa, there is so much more I can do. And that broadens my audience, but at the same time, I could still be focused and niche. So there's just really cool stuff going on there. And even though at the sound of it at a high level, I wouldn't overpass that because, again, there's just so many, again, missed opportunities, lots of other things that we can do to capitalize on that. And just a quick classic example here, one that Patrick shares in the video, I think he shared it before in the masterclass and I can relate with, is just, hey, Patrick and I love JRPGs, but we don't have all that much time for them, especially if they're really focused on side quests and we need to do all these side quests to get to the next section and everything else. He's busy with work, I'm busy with work and kids. When those things are happening and games are designed in such a way, you're taking a fan such as, myself and Patrick and potentially eliminating us as a potential player because of those things, those elements, let's say in this case, the side quests, are no longer making it accessible for people like us. So it goes into those things, at least to really start to consider the importance of them. Now, the last and final component is monetization. Now, what I really like about this is just simply the depth and detail that Patrick goes into, specifically the most impactful types of monetization strategies. And, this is where the section gets a little bit more granular, which I think is awesome and great, but it's also why this module of the course is where I would maybe consider to be a little bit more advanced. So you may not be able to implement everything. It does get granular. It doesn't get into the absolute specifics or step by step in terms of like how you go in and execute that, but it does from a strategic level go very, very deep. And again, can get a little bit more advanced depending on, who you are and what your game is and everything else. But the main call out that I want to make with this is the fact that when you have the monetization aspect compared to these other principles and concepts about, intrinsic motivation and all these other things, what it does, it makes the monetization module become even stronger because it gives you a foundation to work from and structure whatever monetization model that you're working on in a way that's empathetic of players, your audiences, and the market as well. Because without that additional context and understanding of intent, whatever we know about monetization models, or even some that we plan on implementing, could come off as disingenuous, distract players or from the experience, or even just give a negative impression. So that's what I love about this section, because he focuses on the most important ones, meaning the most impactful ones. But with that combination of all the other principles and the other two categories, it really strengthens the monetization aspect. Because again, if you're not leading with that empathetic approach, if you're not considering what those motivations are, and aligning those things, it can make it challenging. So it becomes a very powerful thing there. So, opportunities for improvement in this course. Well, one, Patrick does this, and I'd like to set those expectations too. Is this is a growing course, and actually, courses in general, this is quite common, and everything else that these are, it's growing. There's more content that's going to be added and everything else. So, quick example of this is there's just only a brief mention about marketing. In fact, there's no real any coverage about marketing. And while in the beginning he does call out that there's actually 4 core pillars, and one of them is user acquisition, which essentially is marketing. That's not in there. It will be added later and everything else. So he will have a section on that, but that's one example. And also just tiny little things, like at the time I reviewed this course, I know that there was just a couple instances where some of the videos cut off a little bit early. All basically a majority of the content was there in that module, and you got everything that you needed, but I did notice it cut short. So I'm sure Patrick is aware of this, and probably has been addressed since the time I recorded this. And then another thing was just, sometimes there's lots of little cuts with the videos. That's pretty standard in these things too. So shouldn't really bother some people, but if it does, it's not a deal breaker or anything like that. Patrick's energy was quite not as what you might expect it to be based on what you heard on the show, if you've ever seen him at his talks or anything. And it's simply because, well, he's just so used to talking to people, engaging with them, and looking at a camera isn't quite the same, and hard to really get excited and energetic for when you're looking at a wall and a little camera on top of your computer. So just something else to call out there. Another just minor thing, like, some video content could be a little bit more concise. Just that was not too much of it ever. It was like the details, information are great. So are the examples, but just there's a few videos in there that I thought could, maybe be cut up a bit. And I'm sure there's a big, huge process. There's a lot of work doing these things, honestly. But hey, the pro side to that is they do have a cool 2x speed feature, so you can watch the videos pretty clear. And I could take in everything at 2x. I usually don't do that. I don't like it, but I wanted to see how it worked. It worked out really well. So that's just a tiny little minor thing. And last but not least, me personally, I would have liked to seen a little bit more coverage on the premium game price points. He does provide really in-depth analysis on how to go. A lot of things that I don't think people consider when they're doing like, a price point analysis and strategy behind your pricing and stuff like that. I wanted to see a little bit more though. But otherwise, I'm sure, Patrick is planning on updating that portion, waiting on some feedback with this and all other sections, because again, just reminding everyone that this is a growing course. And despite my feelings of, what I just called out to, there's still so much in here, a lot of value, and he's also going to be updating it, adding more. So there's just even more value that's going to be coming through the course later. So who is this course for and not? Well, a lot of the principles and teachings related to player engagement and accessibility modules, not necessarily the monetization here, I would say, well, to some degree, yes, too. They're probably or may not be applicable to anyone looking to apply them immediately, like now, like get the course. Yes, I want to more engage people more and everything with this current project and then put it in. Well, if you're well into development with the current project, I can't see that happening. There's probably going to be too many things that you'd have to do, restart, whatever, right? So if you're in the middle and you're hearing these things and this sounds great and everything, I would say it's not going to be for you. But however, I would say that it doesn't mean that the learnings couldn't be used to help support your outlook, thought process, or even identify potential errors in projects you're currently working on. So what this means is, in theory, if you are currently far along with development, the course could help you prepare for challenges you may face. And having that level of understanding can make the world of a difference to help mitigate issues that may arise. And just kind of an example to look at this, right? So again, if you're looking for a quick fix to something that you're doing right now, much further in development, probably not. But a way to look at this is, look, if you have, let's say, a maintenance schedule for your car, and you know that 100,000 miles, you need to do a certain type of service. So if you know that, as you approach that mark, you can brace yourself for the costs associated with performing, that service at 100,000 miles. So in your game, if you realize that you have too many types of, let's say, intrinsic motivations in your game, or things aren't balanced well between the three main factors, or those core pillars, or you're trying to focus really heavily on one that or a few that aren't strengths of yours, right? All different examples. At least you now have will likely have a better understanding of that and can be prepared for what the result may be due to having clarity and understanding of those things. So, back to the example of the car, if you don't know what maintenance you need to do and when, and if it breaks down, it can create a lot of stress and uncertainty and until you're able to figure out what the cause of the issue was. And that's ultimately where I see the benefit there in that instance. But otherwise, if you're looking to do things right now, I would say it's in a current project, this isn't going to be the course for you. Now, I would say who this is for in terms of, let's say, an ideal prospective student. Well, first, it's really for anybody of any skill level, like I shouted out to before. So if you're just starting out making games as an indie dev or worked at a studio as a game designer or even production manager, several projects, the content covered here will likely benefit you in some way, especially for the player engagement and accessibility sections. Now, again, the monetization strategies covered are a little bit more advanced, especially when addressing, let's say, things like live ops or other similar monetization models. But otherwise, it's pretty much for anybody. And plus, knowing these things in advance is still going to be helpful. And I would say this is also for people who want to hone in more on their ability to understand and be more empathetic of players' needs and how to apply that to their game. Because, look, I mean, there's lots of cases in the industry as a whole where this isn't being done. So if you're really looking to take that empathetic approach and to, drive up everything else, results, and work towards greater sustainability, that's going to help too. And, honestly, if these things are all in line with what you're doing, and let's say some of you might think, hey, I could learn this on my own. That's fine and cool and everything else. But here's the thing. This is also going to save you a ton of time in understanding some fairly complex principles that Patrick does a great job at simplifying, and a whole lot of other information, because he puts it together in such a focused format so you don't get distracted and everything else. But again, yeah, you can learn everything on your own, but the fact that you're taking this person's years of experience, a lot of other scientific principles that have been applied in various areas outside of just games, and then being able to attribute and articulate it just for games, I think it's going to hard to find anything that does quite that. And so the time savings is huge there, especially if this is something you want to dive in further on. And lastly, if anybody's looking to be part of a community that has a really focused and really driven to explore these concepts and strategies further, this is really cool. Because again, one of the problems I have with a lot of communities out there related to game dev and such is just they're fairly general. And it's not to say those communities don't provide value, but to have a place where conversations around these very specific topics can be explored further and in greater depth with your peers, your colleagues, is just really exciting to me. And I haven't found many that do that. So that's why I think it's another cool thing to consider and who this would be for, especially if you're really on top and really want to dive into these types of topics more, and knowing that there's community there, that's going to be something that you'll want to be on top of as well. So final thoughts of this course. I mean, really the main strength that I would say of this course is just simply the depth it provides and its principles and strategies while applying them in an empathetic approach to game design and development. Again, backed by science and Patrick's experience. And I think it's that combination that gets me really excited about the course, because as I have alluded and mentioned before in the masterclass series, I don't see a lot of courses, resources, or information out there take the approach that Patrick does in his course, getting to the very deep behaviors, the motivations behind why players do what they do, and understanding them as a whole, as people. And then again, how do we articulate that? How do we incorporate that into the games that we're making? And again, it's that understanding and addressing the why. There's plenty out there that talks about the how, but without the why, it can make everything we do after that a challenge, especially if we don't understand the motivations of players. And the content in the course is currently provides a robust, strong start. And, though it currently doesn't cover anything about user acquisition or marketing, I really look forward to when Patrick adds that module, as I feel strongly that applying the engagement and motivation and principles that he discussed in this course to marketing will likely make this probably one of the best and most comprehensive courses on marketing out there, because most likely it would be tackling the why and intent behind it. Because when we understand the why and intent behind things like marketing, again, that is just something you should all know from my time here on the podcast. I'm a component of a main driver in the work that I do. And it's when those things combine, you're really going to be able to create irresistible games and get people hooked and create that ongoing player engagement. So to conclude this review, if you're interested in the course and if you still have questions or whatever, I would say, hey, I'm open. Reach out to me, Andrew@rengenmarketing.com. Also want to call out, there is still a limited time discount exclusively to listeners of the podcast. So if you are interested and want to do that, just sign up. So please, it's really a good discount right now. We've got something in the works down the line I'll share later at another time. But for right now, for a short amount of time, take advantage of that discount if you are interested. Otherwise, go back, reference the masterclass again if there's any areas. Patrick does do an awesome job covering a lot of the stuff, but nowhere near as much as we do on the podcast. And again, if you are interested and you sign up, make sure to use the code IGM so you can take advantage of that discount. And again, obviously, we will get a commission if you do so. Have questions, reach out. Patrick should be accessible too by, I believe there's other ways that you can reach out to him that should have been in the previous masterclass show notes and stuff. And last but not least, guys, just thank you so much for being such great listeners, allowing us the opportunity to do something like this, something different. And again, if you'd like, it would mean the world to us, but just reach out, provide feedback, let us know what your thoughts are on this, not just the review, but also what are your thoughts of, this whole process, the masterclass, and everything else. It just means the world to us. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time.